Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Hellboy, the Crooked Man. So, I get it that people who may not have all have heard about this film because it wasn't really well advertised, as well as also it's like the Crooked Man. Like, I saw the Conjuring movie and they already talked about the Crooked Man. So what more could this movie really do? And also, I think a lot of people are looking at this film and saying, like, oh my god, this is another Hellboy character. Good god, like, how many times are we gonna get a similarly rotation of actors who are gonna play this role? And also, you'll be really attached to whoever was to have been a specific actor who was to have played this specific role and this and that, whatever have you. So I get it. And I'm also going to tell you here that for this movie specifically, they make you understand why this character is to be the way he is because he is a younger version of Hellboy in a specific time period of Hellboy. And also, this movie is to actually connect to origins of the character that was never actually discussed in any of the other Hellboy films or possibly video game or possibly animated movies, of which that all those things exist. If anything, also, if I was to have just watched the video games and the animated movies and then watched this film, I'm like, you know what? Like, this could be like a lot of potential to set up for eventual franchise. And then if you watch the Ron Perlman's and the Hellboy 2019 things and whatever after that, like, this movie, like, really is, I would say, a good starting point for a franchise, anyways. So I think, one, it fits the bill perfectly for that, even though it does feel like a fan made film that has a big budget, or it does feel like a very much made for TV movie for this character, which a lot of people could groan about, which I get that. I know a lot of people will also nitpick the crap out of this film or also be matching it to some comic book of Hellboy page for page and whatever. I get that. I'm going to go on and say also that the dialogue fits the theme so well in this movie. And that's the thing I really enjoyed about this movie is that a lot of supernatural movies, like, you go and you hear everything that they're saying and you don't believe any of it. Whereas in this movie, the dialogue matched what was going on so perfectly, as well as also, like, everything that they were kind of bringing with the Hellboy character and this, like, everything about it, I was like, man, this is, like, so interesting and it felt so fresh and it didn't feel like they were trying so much so to, like, connect to the other things. They were trying to come up with the best dialogue that they could in this film, and I really enjoyed what they were doing in this film, dialogue wise. Even though I think my biggest complaint probably about this movie is probably the build or the momentum. Whereas I feel like some people could, at some point of, like, uh the little building blocks of the eventual part of this movie, people can disconnect certain scenes and just say, okay, that didn't work and toss it away, but then just keep watching the film and seeing, like, okay, that worked, like, I liked this, and they could really just nitpick all the way through. And also, you could say that eventually, like, this movie is so slow, and eventually at some points, like, you can see where, like, there's this big action scene and there's this face off, and you're thinking it's like, man, like if there's going to be a way to end this movie, this really should have been it. And then all of a sudden they just kind of slow back down. And then by the time they try to finish off the movie, like it doesn't have as big as an impact as that big massive fight scene that they had. Of course, let's just say it, over by this church. And when you get to the church scene, you're just like, man, like that was so much of a big thing. But then like the finale of this actual movie like doesn't like it doesn't match. It doesn't it doesn't connect momentum wise. And I can see where a lot of people could have that criticism, as well as I might. But then again, also, like, I enjoyed what eventually is, instead of just clear cut going up momentum, like, this was kind of an enjoy the ride and, like, the roller coaster of this. And to have this movie be much more of, like, this road trippy kind of movie instead of just being this clear cut, uh, like, hey, we're just kind of gonna go on and like build this story even though it won't make sense because we just got to keep doing all these like bigger and bigger things. Like, yeah, sometimes in movies, like they just try to throw all these things at you to just try to have that momentum, and then eventually it just hurts the story. Whereas this movie, like, it feels like they were trying to do everything to keep this story going well, even if it meant that, like, well, hey, like uh I didn't like this scene or I didn't like that. Yeah, so uh but again, the dialogue. Oh my god, the dialogue of this movie. I enjoyed. Um some people could say that it, like, well, yeah, but these movies are supposed to be funny, or these movies are supposed to be this, or Hellboy is supposed to be that, and but I get it. I'm going to say that forget everything you know about this character and just go into this film and maybe enjoy it. A lot of people can go on and say, yeah, this could be the Jeepers Creepers 4 of the Hellboy franchise. And a lot of people could feel like this is Ghost Rider 2 Spirit of Vengeance compared to Nicolas Cage, the first Ghost Rider. And this, like, I get it. But I also can see that this character can go on and be done in a number of different ways. And also, I can feel now that I've seen this that like Hellboy could work as a fan film and maybe a YouTube series, and that someone could just make if they just had enough money, and really do a really interesting approach to this, and do well now that I'm seeing this film. And also realizing that the Crooked Man is one of Hellboy's rogues gallery, like I was like, wow, like this is one of the better, I feel, Hellboy villains, because it actually fits the actual supernatural theme, as well as like you have all kind of the other Hellboyish kind of characters that are just kind of like, I don't know if I really like the villains as well as like I don't feel like they completely match, and I get it matches the story, but then again, like I don't like them. I think this is one of the better Hellboy villains in my opinion. Um and I don't want to go on and say that this movie is anywhere better than any of the other live action Hellboy movies, but I think that this movie deserves to be seen. I feel like this movie deserves um, for people to see this as a prequel movie and possibly like this movie as a prequel movie, even though also there is some goofy things going on, like the big, huge, massive crow thing. Uh, People could have a problem with that. Like people could see parts of this movie and just be like, "Man, this movie's just really weird," and I get it. And a lot of people um, could probably feel that there's maybe like too much of the witch stuff going on that I feel has to just kind of like stretch out the story of this film, where it should be a lot. It should have been a lot more about the Crooked Man, and we kind of had to build up the Crooked Man. I get it, and then also how we have the Crooked Man, where he has like the coins, and also the thing about, yeah, like the Crooked Man eventually like transforms into this crow, because we're doing some interesting things with uh witchcraft here, where we're kind of having the witches and the Crooked Man, like eventually they all like transform into these animals. Hence when you go on, you see like snakes and stuff like that within like the trailers of this film. Like that's the whole connection, is we're starting to see that um they are trying to do interesting stuff with witchcraft. And I also applaud this movie for trying to do something different than a lot of the other Hellboy films, which is to do this kind of transformational thing. As well as also, we had like this really interesting scene where eventually we have this skin suit, which I'll try to leave that as vague as much as possible for, again, for people to check the movie and understand what is the meaning of that. What do you mean? What the heck is that about? So this movie goes on, and it's the origin story of the character. It's some stuff that they never really discussed in other Hellboy films, and I liked that. And we also go on and we have this movie be a side mission that leads us to the main story. And that, I feel, if you kind of look at the very first Hellboy movie, it kind of matches. Like we go on and we have the Big Red, who goes on to just kind of face off against this Samael dog like character. And Big Red is just thinking that this is kind of the normal day to day business, and this dog is going to be easily defeated. But then come to find out he's the Hound of Resurrection, and then it's like, oh well, crap! Like, then how am I going to be able to kill it? And then like this whole dog thing leads us into a bigger thing going on, which of course to be eventually leading us to uh, the characters in Hellboy's early origins, which of course leads us to, and that's the whole first Hellboy movie right there, is the whole going from the Hound of Resurrection to eventually uh, getting us to those true villains. And the Crooked Man is a much more is a really interesting villain in this story, and seems like, again, like this movie tries so much so to fit within the supernatural theme, and the dialogue, I think, really does that really well, and I love that. Um, but then also the Crooked Man fits the theme so well, where as a lot of people would probably have like some kind of problem with the Hellboy movies, where it's like, well, yeah, like uh, I liked I liked Ron Perlman, but I didn't like all of his villains. His villains were crappy and weird and whatever. And like this one, I liked both Big Red and both the Crooked Man at the same time. And I'm trying to avoid to say the title so much so, because I don't know if that's going to be a curse or that's going to be whatever, and that just might determine whatever is to be monetized or demonetized on this channel. Or I could just call him Red the whole time and say that's what I'm going to call this character the whole time, is just Red. So yeah, like there's also some interesting dialogue of some people going on and looking at Red and wanting to like look at him and just immediately call him the devil. And we have that kind of whole like swing against it where it's like, well, no, like if anything, like I've seen the devil and it's clearly not you. And then we realize that like um that it seems that Red is going to have like a tough hill to climb to try and figure out his way and strategize his way to try and defeat Big Red here, or to defeat have Big Red face off against the Crooked Man here. We also have, of course, no Abe Sapien in this movie, no Fishman in this movie, but Red does have a sidekick in this movie, and it ends up being Agent Song, which we come to find out is a character named Joe, who ends up kind of dabbling a little bit in witchcraft. And it seems that we're also in this movie trying to give this character kind of this full origin kind of story in a way, and giving her backstories and saying that out of the dynamic duo that they represent here, that she's the smart one and she's the book smarts one, and she's usually like not a field operative, she's usually in a library reading a book somewhere. So yeah, so we're trying to go on and like and kind of do more than just saying like, okay, we're gonna build up Red here, and that's the only character that we're gonna give a whole story of. Like they also go on and build up this character named Tom, who a lot of people could probably have seen in the trailers. He was the Yellowstone guy. He was in the 6666 whatever number of show that eventually just kind of got smashed back into Yellowstone because that show just wasn't, I guess, good enough. Uh, that character I feel ends up just getting written off as this like Johnny Blaze like character, and eventually there's like a whole scene that ends up taking place in the church where the Reverend is talking to Tom and consistently using words like blaze and blazing and blazing and fire and this, and like just say it that he's freaking Johnny Blaze. Just say it, because I don't know how many times you can just have the Reverend talking to Tom here and just consistently say the words of blaze and blazing, and like I'm just immediately just like, this dude is Johnny Blaze. Basically, he's almost like he almost has blonde hair just like Johnny Blaze does. So you're just basically saying he's Ghost Rider in a lot of ways, but he doesn't have the skull and flames and whatever. Um, but he ends up being this like male witch, this necromancer kind of character. So, or warlock, or however you want to write that off, a male witch. Uh, we also just have a lot of witch and witchcrafty characters. We have Cora, which also should have just been Effie, which eventually leads us to the Crooked Man. And I'm like, man, we have a lot of like stuff that is just kind of like follow the bouncing ball of how this all connects. 7 degrees of the Crooked Man kind of thing. And like I was like, okay, why did we have to go on such that kind of path? But then also it gives us kind of these interesting visuals of things, with all of those ties in, where eventually this leads us to eventually having Tom like re-meet up with what is to go on and be his father and this and that. And there's going to be some parenting stuff within this film that again will tie into origins of characters, but then also will tie into even origins of Red. So there's a lot of good stuff here. I've talked for far too long about it. Uh, I feel that this movie, again, like I'm looking at it as like this is a great origin movie. I feel so. like I want to say that this is I don't want to probably say great because I think a lot of people are going to write this off as just this cheap movie and a lavishly budgeted fan film and whatever. And a lot of people could have problems with this, especially with the whole like spider thing and um and this and that. And I thought that this was a almost great film, and all the other Hellboy movies are of course much better than this movie, hands down. With what they all do budget wise, it's a completely different animal. This is great because I came in this movie with absolutely thinking that it was going to be like dumpster fire, worst thing. Like, how is this going to just be like a money making scheme of a film? And then by the end of the movie, I'm like, wow, like that's not what this was at all. Like, this was just a thing of just like, well, hey, like we're gonna go on and do our spin of Hellboy. We're gonna do our different thing, and our characters are just gonna have really fun and good enough dialogue that makes us show like how much effort we had put into this film that you probably aren't going to see in its actual budget. So again, in a lot of ways like it does look like that this whole movie like could have been pitched as a video game or an animated movie, and I could have understood how this could have been made into those. And then also I could have seen how this movie could have been really written as like a made for TV or just a uh like a show. Like I could have seen how this could have been pitched as a show, and then they just decided like, hey, let's just make a movie of this. And maybe they're trying to pitch it as something because they were doing this in like chapters and parts in this film. And I was just thinking, like, were they gonna go on and make this like a mini series? Like, where were they going with this? And that's what I found was fascinating. So, uh, almost great film. I enjoyed it. A lot of people can go on and really, by my grading of this, have very high expectations of this movie and could clearly say the exact opposite. So, the thing that I'm saying with this movie, if anything, is watch it, is see it. Regardless of your just purity or your whatever of like, well, if it's not Ron Perlman, I'm not seeing it's if it's not Hellboy 2019 or a Hellboy video game or a Hellboy animated or comic book thing, I'm not watching, I'm not checking, I'm whatever. I get all that. I get all the loyalty and the what. I'm just saying that this movie is not a bad film, I feel. It's good enough. It's uh it's better than a lot of supernatural things out there, and I hope eventually it goes on and is to be the sleeper thing that everyone sees, and it does well enough to justify a possible sequel that probably will have no advertising budget, or goes on to do another Hellboy something and it justifies a Hellboy something. But with that said, I will also go on and have you be able to see this movie for absolutely free. Absolutely free, you say? Yes. I have a app there, in fact, called Zelliphonic, Zelivonic, where you can go on to this app and see Hellboy: The Crooked Man for absolutely free. And so, like, if you're looking and like, well, yeah, I can watch this on a Fandango's or a Amazon's or something, and I have to pay $20. I don't want to see that for $20. You can go onto this app and see it absolutely for free. If you have a mobile device, a tablet, an iPad, an iPhone, a smartphone, because maybe your phone finally, for once, is not dumb. You can go out of your way to probably go into a Google Play Store and be able to check out an app called Zelliphonic, Zelivonic, and see this movie for absolutely free. as well as also see a number of other Hellboy stuff because maybe you were the person that didn't go on and see all the other Hellboy things and you're completely missing out on a very interesting supernatural character. Again, there are supernatural or there are Hellboy animated films as well as also there was a Hellboy video game which I started playing and then never finished. That was a mistake on my part, but also I think when I started that game, I got very confused of what the heck was actually going on, and so I just stopped playing, and that is a big mistake on my point because I could have had one heck of a story, maybe. I don't know. Um, but anyways, I'm gonna go on and go into spoilers because I've taken far too freaking long to talk about this in a very cryptic like sense. So I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers and go out of my way to say that it is about that time to break down this movie fully. And I'm going to try because I already realize I've been spending 25 minutes freaking going nowhere with this movie. So I'm going to say here that I'm probably going, when going into spoilers, to speed up as much as I can because I've realized how much time I've already taken on this review. So without further ado, see this freaking movie. If you've already seen this movie, then by God, you'll probably know everything that I'm going to say here, and it's going to be a waste of time to you for you, and you're probably going to click off, and you're going to be very disappointed, and whatever have you. But I'm going to state everything that happens within this movie for the good chunk of this movie, and try and skip ahead as much as humanly possible. So, with that said, I'm going to go on and say that it is about that double five time territory again. And if you are to be a person uh, that also is kind of asking, well, hey, is this movie scary? There was never really like jump scenes in this movie. I feel that if you don't like spiders, you might not like this. You might not like this movie. Uh, but then also like I don't feel like this movie uh was anything that didn't make me any more than maybe like uneasy, but like I was never going into this movie thinking like, oh my god, I'm just gonna get jumped everywhere. Because a lot of times I think a lot of the Hellboy movies were like more comedy, where this movie doesn't go on and like throw the jokes every 2 seconds. This actually has Hellboy like seem much more of a clever, kind of smarter character. Whereas like Hellboy in like the Ron Perlman movies were just like, how can we deliver the jokes? And like I felt that Hellboy was a much more clever guy in this film. So that's another bit of points within this movie. So let's just go into it. Spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about the time again to spoil this movie. Um, letting you know now. I don't know who. I don't know if Joe. Uh, Joe Song or whatever Agent Song. I don't know if that was the very first character that was in the Hellboy movie. That was Blair, the girl with all the fire around her. Like I don't think that was that character whatsoever. I think they just recreated another character here. Um, and I know I'm already ignorant by to have not have looked into that or checked into that or whatever. Uh, but like I like that they're kind of bringing in female characters. Uh, specifically, they're trying to figure out ways to write female characters into this movie. I felt, and as all also giving Hellboy this kind of strong female kind of lead character, which I honestly don't feel that they probably did enough with. But again, at least when you go on and you have a guy like Hellboy, and he feels like the focus of the film, instead of going on and like, man, we're trying to introduce all these characters and they're taking so much of the screen time. Which you could also say that Tom might have felt that way. Um, but then again, like this actor who plays Tom could have gotten maybe butts into seats because maybe he was a bigger actor than maybe some of the other ones. I don't know. I don't really care. Um, but dare say I spend so much freaking time talking about this anyways. So, spoiler time. Let me pause here. Let me break down this film, and also let me get the heck out of here. Uh, in all honesty, I'm going way later than I probably would, and if I get like really tired just during this review, I apologize. But I've also been doing Timu quite a hefty amount lately, and lately I've had a lot more success with that app lately. Surprisingly, successes, and that is what has been tying up a lot of my time lately. And people probably won't understand what I mean by that, and people will just be like, "Well, like maybe you should have cut down on that." I get it, but then also, I get it, but then also, um, it's very hard to have figured out a way to cut down on that. Compared to all the other things I had going on in my life during right now. I have too much going on in my life right now. I got workouts, I got this, I got Timu that takes a while to get it all done, and then also, I would actually like to have a life. So, yeah, there are certain days where I'm like, hey, I actually want to watch a movie. I actually want to watch a YouTube video, and I actually want to watch like just something for fun that I like can devote a sliver of my time of because everything is taken up by so many other things. So let's get let's get on to the actual breakdown because you won't give a about my life and me in general. Um, so let's pause here. Let me break down this film. All right. So a little behind the scenes. So normally, by the length of this whole intro and everything, I would probably have stopped this whole video and started all over again to try to figure out how to get it shorter. I probably would have also gone on and introed this 30 times before actually getting to this point. Uh, because normally I would, in my brain, second guess everything I'm saying. And so for any time I'm to go on and to be able to do a review is by pure luck because a lot of times it would take me like 2 hours to figure out how to talk about all this and also to figure out ways to justify talking about myself, even though sometimes I would also criticize that probably no one would care. Uh, but yeah, so let's get into the very beginning of this movie that goes on, and it starts in 1959 with this whole kind of road trippy thing. So Hellboy is in this train car with this mystery box. We're trying to figure out what this is. As eventually Hellboy goes on and makes his way onto this box and is sitting on it. And so, as well as also this young G-man who we would probably assume may go on and to have been maybe one of the G-men who go on and be one of the other ones in one of the other Hellboy movies. Yeah, not so. And so this Hellboy goes on and is to kind of tell us that like he is the heebie-jeebies and stuff like that, and like when we kind of look at all the Hellboy movies and how like he is to go on and like state that he's a very like in some ways self-loathing character, and he even in this movie even addresses it where he says that he hates himself for the monster that his mother become or made him become, and how also like he is to say it's like, well, yeah, um like I know I wouldn't normally like not stand out anywhere, but it seems like I'm fitting in well within this place. But so Hellboy is to go on and help us like understand like, okay, like remind me why we're all here, and we go on and we shift to the book smart girl with the glasses who ends up being Joe or Agent Song here. And she's going on and she's telling us, like, well, yeah, like, we're going on and we're taking this uh, demonic entity spider that is to be very much like poisonous and dangerous and this and that. And luckily, uh, also this spider is to be sedated, and it's sleeping and it's dormant and with inside this box. And if anything, we're just on this just train ride 600 miles to the Fairfield, and we're not hoping for any trouble. So we have Red that goes on and is to be just sitting on this box, and we're trying to understand, like, okay, why is Red here? Like, why does a character like this need to expend so much energy on this specific mission where it doesn't seem that he is really there to do anything? Well, come to find out, we have Red that in the very beginning of this is trying to understand where some noise is coming from. And he's going on and he's turning on his radio and seeing if it's like something to do with the radio. Maybe it's some kind of um, like weird, goofy thing that like comes down to certain frequencies or something. And we all of a sudden come to find out that this spider, who is to have been laid dormant and to have been sedated and everything, is to have broken from its slumber and is starting to go on and not only um, spring from out of his box to kind of attack Red here, then turns around and turns on um, to the G-Man and kills kills him by decapitating, taking off his head, or crushing his head. And then going on and between the spider and Red facing off within this train car, so much so that it's all of a sudden rocking this car and derailing the car back and forth. And this all of a sudden has us separating this train car between all the others and just kind of falling down this hill. So we, of course, have Red that turns to Joe, the only remaining agent here. It's like, well, hey, like, you got to go on, you got to play dead here. So that way, this spider is only like going to be attracted to the only moving thing, which of course is going to be Red here. So, because Red hasn't gone on to kill this massive spider yet, and so he's going to go on and try to figure out and track down where exactly this is, and it's dangling upon these trees. So Red goes on and tries to face off against this spider, is to go on and have this tree branch and stab into it and hope that this is to quite easily take this thing down. But instead, eventually, this spider just goes on and starts to shrink itself and then think, oh, yeah, like, well, this would be an easy way to just obtain this thing. And then all of a sudden, it slides into this little sewer. And we even have a really good dialogue of where Red turns to Joe and it's like, who builds a tunnel to hell in the middle of the woods? Like, again, so much of this dialogue, just bit by bit, is just so good and so, like, man, it sets up, like, things so well and gives us such interesting visuals, as well as also, like, give us, like, just some, just clever dialogue here. So, but again, like, Joe is to make us realize that, like, well, hey, like, either way, like, this is our mission now, and like, ultimately, like, we've lost the cargo, so we have to figure out a way to get to the spider. And maybe once they are to make their way seemingly into this town, they're going to eventually figure out how to get to the spider, which will also lead them to how to also get to the crooked man, and so on and so forth. But also, like, Hellboy is to help us understand why this spider like got out of dormant the way it did, and how it was to go on and uh like be needing like a path to go somewhere, which leads him down the sewer or the tunnel anyways, because he's going to eventually try to connect with the thing that he's talked to, which is to be the dark thing. But if anything, also, like, we get these little moments where Red is turning to now Joe and giving us backstory of this character, which tends to happen through this movie. We get these times where Red is turning to these other characters and having them just kind of go off on their stories, and just kind of creates for interesting moments here. If some people may complain that they may not like that because they want um, Red to be the focus, but again, it's just interesting stories. So we come to find out that Joe like is to have rarely been a person who has been in the field, and uh and has to realize that there's going to be a much uh way for her to fill in the shoes of it not just being uh like research in a library somewhere. So, but if anything, like I said, um Hellboy eventually helps us understand that, one, the spider woke up because he is a dark thing that ended up talking to another dark thing, and the place that they're to be standing in has a stink about it, and that stink called out to the spider, and so they have to figure out what that is, and eventually that'll lead them on the path of where they're going to go to have them connect with, again, the crooked man. So it's also like we get this whole like screwed, chewed, and tattooed thing, which I thought was kind of a funny line. So we have Red and we have Agent Song, and they make their way to this home, and immediately it's like kind of the common sense thing would always be to go to a place and ask for a phone, and we immediately have this woman here who knows who Hellboy is. It's like, oh, I saw you on the cover of Life magazine and this and that, and and obviously like the person is being very condescending to Agent Song. It's like, well, yeah, like we have a phone, like we also have a colored television, and we have this, we have that. It's like, duh, like wouldn't anybody have a phone? So they go inside to make their way into this home, to come to find that there is just this kid that is just on the ground, and he's pale as all white, and he's wearing very little clothes also, and like that obviously is to be like a standout thing. And so Red is looking at all the family. It's like, well, hey, like obviously this person needs to go to a doctor. Why aren't any of you calling him? Why aren't you taking him there? And the whole family is looking at Red. It's like, dude, a doctor isn't going to help this kid. And that tells us, like, okay, like there's something either possession wise or magical going on with this kid. And like is Red going to be the one to kind of step in and just be like, okay, well, like, say 4 Hail Marys and and here's 2 pills and call me in the morning kind of thing. But instead of Red really going on and just kind of curing this person, we all of a sudden instead have another person come in named Tom, and he is to much more quickly understand because he is familiar with the town, who could have gone on and like really just started this whole thing and cursed this kid, as well as also coming up with the remedy or solution to help this kid out by uh, the end of this whole thing of helping us understand like who Tom Farrell is, and that he hasn't been in town for a very long time, but all of a sudden Hellboy arriving here all of a sudden triggers Tom to come back into town because he has some unresolved business with this town that he feels after going on and going into war, which they show him being in the military and this and that, how like this town has always just kind of in his back pocket been something that like he has aged into realizing that he like more and more further away that he has gotten, like that he needs to come back home at some point and face his fear in some roundabout way is what I heavily roundabout way to come to just state that. But anyway, so we would also have Tom, who again is very familiar with this town, as well as also being very familiar with the witchcraft of this town, comes to the conclusion that uh, there had been this thing called a witch ball, which I immediately would be like, okay, like, what is the difference between a witch ball and a hex bag? Which I kind of made a conclusion that they're kind of one and the exact same thing. Uh, but if anything, like they also break down the recipe of a witch ball, which this granny oak man or oak male or I the granny goes on and she breaks down this whole spell, and it's like, okay, like that might be wildly different than a usual hex bag, but this witch ball ends up being present in one portion of the house, and eventually is to tell us that that witch ball was to eventually go on to purposely curse this kid. So Tom knows that this witch ball is to immediately be connected to a woman named Cora Fisher, which he has had Tom a connection with because at some point he was going to always end up with that girl or marry that girl, and eventually once we get further into Tom making his way to Cora's place explains all this, and eventually further goes on to explain his origin story of how eventually he became a male witch in a way, or a warlock, or necromancer, or whatever is to really fit with this character. But as Tom is to start to head out, he is to go on and to explain to the family, like, okay, uh, like go on and take off the boys' clothes, boil them, um, call out Cora Fisher's name, and uh, if she's the one that actually bewitched him, like that'll bust the spell. Um, and so after go on and rectifying what had happened with the kid and giving the the treatment or the cure, eventually Thomas realized, like, well, hey, you know what? Like, I should probably make my way home and see my folks. And the mother of this house goes on and tells Thomas, like, well, yeah, about that. Like, your mom, dead. Your dad, dead. And Thomas, like, oh, really? Okay, well, like, I kind of would have probably figured that because, if anything, my dad was a drunk and my mom with this and that and that. So, um, he is to still go on and still like go on his path, and eventually Joe is to be like, well, hey, like, you know what, this witch, this core girl that you're eventually gonna go and talk to and this and that because you're familiar with her. Like, if anything, like, maybe like we should kind of work together, because that's kind of in our area of expertise. And then Hellboy grabs Joe. It's like, wait a minute, like, expertise, like you specifically, like if anything, like, no, like if anything, I'll do the heavy lifting here, but like expertise, uh like that doesn't clearly uh define both of us. But then also, once we start to find that Joe is more and more to be like, well, hey, like, I'm kind of into witchcraft, and like I also want to kind of ask core questions, and so uh it was also like Hellboy is wanting to be very protective of Joe. And it's like, well, hey, we should probably just head back to headquarters. And Joe was like, no, 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 no. Like, there's something going on here. We have to like investigate and figure this out. And also, like Hellboy said himself that this place has some stink, so we need to figure this out. And the later and later that we don't look further into this, the worse it can get. So, all right. So we go on, and like I said, we have Granny Oakham, who ends up going on and is looking at this crow, and she starts to explain this whole witch ball and greens thing, which I didn't get what the heck this was. And then I was like, oh, like, this granny, this witch, is going on and talking to this crow and explaining the recipe of a witch ball. And the crow is to actually be the crooked man. So I'm just like, okay, like maybe uh, the crooked man has never heard of a uh, of a witch ball before, but then also, like, I guess we just have to understand that uh, really all the weird, goofy things that are to be put into a witch ball is to just kind of be very elaborate. But so they go on, and we have Tom, Red, and Joe make their way to Cora's place. And now that like Tom and Joe have kind of gone on and further kind of walked with Red here, and Red probably more and more just kind of finds it weird that Tom doesn't have any weird uh, kind of awkwardness while just kind of making his way to Cora's place with Red, and how um, and how like how of course Red looks like Tom is not like, well, hey, like, you look like the devil and this and that, and the devil can't step foot in a church, and this and that. And Tom is like, well, no, like, you know what, I've seen the devil, and like, I'm sorry, sir, but that's not you. and And so they make it to Cora's place, and then they focus on finding out where Cora is. And eventually they have that whole stopping gap, but then eventually they turn around and go right back to it, where they go on and explain, like, okay, like you said, like you've seen the devil before, what did you mean? And then that opens up Tom's backstory. So like we probably could have gone on and had Tom's story like done a little bit earlier while they're kind of walking on. Like I feel the whole break of things probably does like have people probably nitpick, where it's like, dude, we could have had them whole like walking, and Tom could have had his backstory done then. It kind of feels weird to kind of break it up all now, um, in the way that they approach this. But anyways, um, they wanted again to do some kind of visually interesting things here, which we'll get to that. So because Tom is still in the way of like, okay, like how is Tom connected to Cora? And it seems that Cora is the local witch here. So so they explain that Tom and Cora might have been lovers at some point, or they were going to eventually end up together. And it seems that Tom is so easily to kind of look into Cora's house and find some of the secret stashes of witch balls, and eventually like jars that have things in with them. So uh and how like the witch ball is to connected to the prior case that they just had, and just be like, okay, like, well, like obviously like Cora has gone on and uh done that prior thing that we just saw in that other home. So there was evidence of another witch ball connecting to that. So eventually they look further into the house, and they go on and they see just a whole body full of skin, but no bones and organs and whatever with inside it. So it's just layers of skin, and they're like, okay, all right. So like eventually, like we'll just kind of wait until this witch comes back, because she's obviously to have like gotten out of her skin, and we come to find out that she had transformed into some raccoon, and she'll make her way back home. So they go on and they take their time now, and they sit and they wait. And while they sit and they wait, Red is to mention how like so much of this witchcraft is to go on and be seemingly very familiar to uh Red in a lot of ways, because come to find out his mother was actually a witch. And I'm like, oh my god, this is opening up like stories that we've never discussed in other Hellboy things, it seems. And it's kind of really cool that we're bringing this up now in this film, and bringing up Hellboy's mother and how he knew about her, because it seemed like a very much mystery of who Hellboy really was. So that tells us that at some point that Hellboy's mother was a witch, and eventually we're going to have an even better connection to Hellboy's mother to this whole story. And I thought that that was kind of cool how eventually this plays out. So, but then this also is to like open up the whole story of like, okay, well, like you said that you met the devil before, like tell me your whole story, because I've kind of told you a little bit of mine. So we go on to come to find out here that uh that Tom and Cora were were kind of like a young love kind of thing. And Tom saw Cora as like, well, hey, she's doing witchcraft, I should do witchcraft too. And like he wasn't thinking of really like how this dark path could go on and lead him to making a big mistake, or making a regret in his life. And so eventually Tom just keeps going on and kind of doing what Cora is to tell him, and eventually comes across this cat, which he eventually skins, and eventually has these cat bones, and eventually, at some point, we come to find that that Tom is going to find one of the cat bones, and it is going to be one of a lucky bone. And eventually, once Tom does go on and find that, he'll meet up against the Crooked Man, and the Crooked Man is eventually going to be a character that is going to at some point want to take Tom's soul at the perfect time. But Tom, when confronted with the Crooked Man, is to run away from him. Run away from him so much so that he is to join the army, leave his world behind, but the only thing that he is to remain and to have a keepsake is that bone. And Thomas mentioned there had probably been a number of occasions where he probably should have died, or it really was to have been um, several cases that he should not have made out of, this and that, whatever have you. But he always realized that the reason why he always made it out was because of that bone, and he would take it out of his pocket. He would look at it and realize, like, well, yeah, like, it's not about how skilled I was. It wasn't about this. It was always about that bone, and that gave me more of a reason for why he would go back and want to face his fear again, or face his fear of the Crooked Man, because really at that point, like, he's faced everything else. And also, like, that bone would never leave Tom, no matter what he did. Like, he would always appear, he would always have it, and so on and so forth. So, uh, man, did I get really ahead of myself. So, we have the raccoon that returns and goes into the mouth and is to reform what eventually is to be Cora's body. And so we don't really see like much of like actually Cora's body, and it gets hidden really quickly. And Cora is looking at Tom, like basically in the straight up just nude, and saying how like this isn't decent for her to be seen by Tom. It's like, well, no, it's okay, it's fine. And so eventually, after kind of like the the re-meeting up of people, Cora goes on and uh, is to start talking uh, with Tom, and mention it's like, well, yeah, like we weren't as smart when we were kids, and we made a lot of stupid decisions. And eventually, Cora did at some point marry a guy who ended up getting killed, and eventually Cora is to realize that all of her life is to meet up to just her getting uh, to be killed or collected by the Crooked Man, because all of the things that she's ever gone on and done. So there, of course, ends up getting noises to be done outside. Hellboy goes on, investigates it, takes a lantern, and eventually there ends up being this person that arrives on horseback, and it's not the Crooked Man, it ends up being Effie. Uh, and so Effie ends up being this other witch, and I'm just like, okay, like, shouldn't have Cora just have been Effie, and we could have like cut all of this. Like, I didn't quite understand why we had to have Effie also, and I was kind of confused who Effie actually was because we spent so much time on Cora. I'm like, okay, who the heck is Effie now? And so we we have this girl who is what I've probably assumed to uh like, why did we have to spend so much time um on the granny? Like, we probably could have had um like we could have had the granny be Effie here, and we could have had one less character. Uh, like, we had to create a whole other character just for Effie, and then explain that she's just some other witch in this town. Um, but so, anyways, regardless, uh, we set up here that Tom is to know this girl, but since the last time he's seen her, Effie has never gone on to age. So Effie is to go on and seemingly be a witch, and of course, she has been one that eventually, by the end of this movie, when they go on to defeat the Crooked Man, she of course will age and be old, because really we come to find that Effie is to be completely like the Robin of the Crooked Man's Batman. So she is to kind of go on and be like the sidekick character that eventually will be this kind of stopgap to tell the guys like, oh hey, be aware or be worried about the Crooked Man. Um, because Effie comes in here and it's to tell Tom, it's like, well, hey, like, yeah, the Crooked Man is looking for you, and Red is like, oh yeah, like he's looking for him. It's like, well, hey, like, well, like, I'm here to tell you, like, we're here to like negotiate things and this and that. So and Effie is to tell Red, it's like, well, like, oh yeah, like, well, the Crooked Man knows all about you, and he's not afraid of you, and this and that. And so eventually, Effie gets off of this horse and is to eventually go on and fly off and then leave here. And eventually, we're like, okay, like, so this girl just leaves, and then this horse is here, and so, like, okay, this horse has nothing going on. Like, why didn't she just ride off in the horse? But we come to find out that even the horse has an important thing going on here, and that uh, the horse is actually Wyatt, Tom's father, and the horse all of a sudden becomes Wyatt and is talking to Tom, and this is like right before he dies, and so Tom has to go on and now bury his father, and now like Tom is like, well, um like, maybe like trying to go on and save my father was like the last thing I can ever go on and do here. Maybe this is why I came back, as well as also like Tom coming back so he can bury his father. So we also have like this moment here where Cora and Red here like have these bugs, and they're like Red is smushing these bugs. Like I don't quite understand what these bugs are for, but the further and further we get in this movie, I then understood what the bugs meant, because the bugs actually represented Crooked Man. Because the further and further we get in this movie, the more that we actually see the Crooked Man, the more we actually get the bugs. And then I'm like, oh, like, this is what that meant. Whereas, like, I just saw two bugs. I'm like, okay, like, what does this mean? But then every time, like, we start to see the power of Crooked Man and how, like, while Hellboy is trying to talk to the Crooked Man, all of a sudden these bugs are like getting in his face and he's trying to shoo him away. I'm like, man, like okay, we're trying to like do every bit of everything we possibly can to show how powerful this Crooked Man is, but also how many supernatural connections that he has with all of these things. So Cora, it seems, ends up getting bitten by this bug and she falls over. And so uh we have Red who ends up smashing one of the bugs, and he's like, "Well, hey, like you wanted me to smash the bug, right?" And Joe is like, "Yeah, I have no problem with you smashing the bug." So after the face off between the small bugs, they go right back into the cabin, and they realize like, okay, like it's been a long night. How about we all try and get some sleep? Even though I'm sure a lot of us has been through so many traumatic experiences that it's going to be very difficult for anybody to go in and do so. But uh so Hellboy goes on and he's looking at Joe and he's trying to comfort her and put some blankets and stuff on her, like, hey, you should really get some sleep and this and that. And like I know it's gonna be really hard with the environment that we're in, but hey, just try your best. And Joe's like, yeah, right. So also the thing about this movie is like the music. The music represents this movie very well, as I feel that like a lot of this music is very old timey and like reminds me of like the Jeepers Creepers movie is a lot. And I feel like this music was also perfectly fitted for this film. And like I also feel that it kind of reminds me of like Fallout and stuff like that too. Uh but I feel like the movie music was very cleverly kind of placed into this film. And even though, yeah, it was probably tying into the time period, still, like, I also felt like the movie music was very clever, um, compared to a lot of other things where it's just kind of like the music is always like forced in a lot of things, so the music is horrible. I thought the music was actually very clever in this and kind of cleverly placed. So, Tom is going on and carrying his father all the way to the church, and some good dialogue is here where Red is asking Tom, it's like, well, hey, do you want me to carry him for a while? And Tom is like, I don't think that's the best thing to do, um, because also we're kind of looking back at the quote of like the sins of the father are carried out by the sins of the son. And so they start talking a lot about sins here, and how eventually uh they're talking about Adam and Eve. And also like Hellboy is kind of mentioning how um there's some sins you just can't shake. You can saw them off, but they'll just kind of grow back. And like a lot of this dialogue here is just really good. This dialogue, oh my god, just like the flow of the dialogue that are going here, and it just comes just a simple thing of like, well, hey man, like you getting tired, like let me like kind of carry that weight for you. And Tom is just kind of taking like the Jesus moment of like, no, I'm gonna carry this cross. I'm gonna carry this cross all the way. So they're going on and they're looking at the people of the town, and every single one of them look just like Effie does, and every single one of them look like a witch. And they're like, well, yeah, like what a great town. It's like, well, yeah, salt of the earth. And Joe turns to Cora and here's the moment where they can talk about that Joe has been studying spells and wants to ask Cora about like, well, hey, like, how can we go on and like and have me like figure out how to actually do the spells? It's more just about the incantations and this and that. And Cora's like, no, 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 like you have to go on and you have to think of like the saddest thing and uh and this and that uh and everything that had led her up to figuring out how to do this witchcraft for Cora had eventually uh, or led up to her just selling her mortal soul to the devil. And so Cora is like telling um, rationally Joe here, it's like, well, yeah, like, uh, yeah, you can tip your toe into this whole thing, but uh, like kind of figure out like where like you should draw back at some point. They're also to go on and say how like the tunnels or the sewers in this place like are really connecting into the town and making that also seem important, like the town is also important to the story, and stating how like the tunnels are like the veins of what is to be the town's hand. And I thought that that was actually kind of rather clever, and how they're also trying to figure out ways to say that they have to go down into the tunnels to try and figure out a way to beat the Crooked Man. And eventually, this leads Joe coming up with a spell to try and conquer the Crooked Man in that way, because she figures out there's something going on with the Crooked Man in these tunnels and how like it's helping the Crooked Man in a way, and they got to figure out how to stop all that. So they're just kind of both Joe and Red are having this conversation about how they feel about this town and this and that with the whole woods and this and that, and how the woods are alive with the sound of music. And then all of a sudden, Cora disappears, and they're trying to figure out where she is. And then she reappears by kind of just up in the air, and she's flying. And here's where we get the trailer part. We see the snake just kind of circling around Cora's body, and so here's where we get Hellboy, who's to grab the snake. He's wrestling with the snake. The snake consistently bites him, which I'm like, okay, like we see in the other Hellboy movies where Red is like very like fire doesn't harm him, this and that. It seems like he's very like impenetrable or invulnerable, but like what will a snake bite do? So all of a sudden, like Red has consistently been like venomed and whatever by this snake. And it seems that after that we go on and have him seemingly have this thought of him possibly being dead right after he takes the neck of the snake and crushes it and kills it. So Red, thinking that he's possibly poisoned, is in all of a sudden this purgatory, and he's following Cora because Cora is actually dead, and so Red is following Cora, making his way to meet up with Red's mother. So Red's mother here, we come to find like her whole uh origin of how she eventually, even in death, had gone on to give birth to what is essentially Red, Hellboy, and how the Crooked Man wanted her to do so. So there's even a possibility that the Crooked Man may have possibly been the father of Red in a way, but then again, like, that's not clearly defined. And also, a lot of people could say it's like, no, 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 no. In comic book issue X number whatever, we clearly define that the devil is Hellboy's father. And this, I get it. And I'm just saying, like, oh yeah, the Crooked Man is, it could theoretically be Red's father just by this whole kind of mother father dialogue alone kind of thing going on here, that uh, that this massive crow is to force upon this girl to have a child, and this that. So do with what you will with this story. Uh so Red is going on and seeing his mother being tortured and put aflame, and eventually giving birth to him. And that, of course, is when Red is to wake up and see that Tom is to have the lucky bone, and now the lucky bone is weirdly just kind of lit. And when Tom is to go on and try to search for Cora, and is to look through her into the grass, realizing that her body has disappeared, realizing that she is now dead. So they make their way to this church, and Tom is to kind of represent well that, like, the church is on kind of sacred ground, or consecrated ground, and that also ties into what happens later for when the Crooked Man is to try and make his way to the church, how that could be a real obstacle course for them to try to figure out how the bad guy is going to face off against Hellboy within this church, and try to get all of his goons or lackeys to try and get to Hellboy to get them out of that church, which is very interesting and creative how they uh, kind of figure out kind of loopholes to that, which I thought was really interesting. So they make their way into this church to speak to this reverend, who we come to find out is blind. So the reverend goes on and he talks to Cora, who he doesn't even realize is a ghost, and they're like, oh, that must be Cora. So the reverend is to talk about how he is to go on and to have like known Cora since she was a tadpole and very young, and but I guess she might be a ghost now. He doesn't know. He just talked to her, and it doesn't matter. So Tom is going to also take his time and talk to Cora, who he recognizes is still there. So Hellboy and everybody's going on and kind of filling this reverend in of what their goal is and what they're trying to accomplish. And so Tom is almost thinking that he should kind of lay down the sword and kind of sacrifice himself here. That he's like, you know what, uh, like maybe I should go on and like I should tell him to take my body and take my penny, and so that way no one else uh will get killed because of uh the dumb stuff that I did, or decisions that I made when I was dumb and I was young. And again here, like, this is where they're going on, and and they're talking about like, well, hey, well, Hellboy's here, and he'll probably be the person to renegotiate all of this, and that also like the Reverend is like, well, hey, like if you guys are gonna try and face this thing, like you should probably go on and get to him pretty quickly while there's still light out, and they're like, well, hey, like we probably should have more than enough time, and Reverend's like, I don't know about that because the Crooked Man is to own this town so much so that he can determine at a drop of a hat when it's light out and when it's dark. So all of a sudden, the town almost eclipses and it ends up turning into darkness, and witches start to surround the church. So Hellboy and Joe and the Reverend and Tom are realizing like, okay, they're kind of stuck here at this church because, of course, the Crooked Man can't go into this kind. So Hellboy is going on and trying to see if he can turn on this light, and nothing seems to be working. So we of course go on and we have Effie uh come out first, and then eventually like to just kind of again goat Tom out within his own brain to come out of the church and and kind of face the Piper, kind of like like come on, like you know that this was like you knew that you were coming here to die, like you knew that you were going to come in here to face the Crooked Man. So we have Tom that is to make his way outside, and as he gets closer and closer to the Crooked Man, um, they start to go on and they start to bargain a little. And Tom is like, well, hey, like, if I go on and I give you this bone and I give you myself and this and that, if I give you everything, like, you're gonna leave everyone else alone, right? This town and everybody and the people that I brought with me, and the uh, and the Crooked Man is like, well, like, well, since you brought these people, like, I'm not just gonna let them go. No, 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 no. Uh, like you have allowed them to go into harm's way. So, like, if like I'm coming after you, I'm also coming after all of them, and like it's too bad, so sad that you went on and like you decided to just attach them like uh, along with you because they're going to they're going to be taken along with you. So, and that has right after that Hellboy jumping in, and he's like, all right, like uh so Hellboy jumps in, tells Tom to go back inside and everybody to go back inside. And so now Hellboy is like, well, hey, like, I know that I know that your girl, your nympho girl, told me that you weren't afraid of me. Well, hey, I ain't afraid of you. And like, well, hey, you better get out of town, trying to scare him off. And so we go on and we start to have the Crooked Man who is starting to bargain. He's starting to bargain with Red. He's starting to bargain with the vet with the Reverend, and he is trying to figure out all these ways, and also he had tried to maybe even negotiate a little bit with Tom until he was interrupted by Hellboy. The Crooked Man starts to bargain with all these people to eventually get technically what he wants. And so Red goes on, it's like, well, hey, like you saw your mother burn, right? Well, hey, like if you kind of give me what you want, if you give me Tom, like I'll let your mother like go to heaven and get wings and this and that. And it's like, well, yeah, but what does Red get? Alternative to that, probably like he sells his soul to hell, as well as also the Crooked Man tries to go on and offer the Reverend. He ends up offering him his youth, his eyesight back, and tries to offer him everything. And the Reverend is just like, no, 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 like, uh, like I don't want my eyesight back. I don't want um any of this thing that this Satan or this devilish character is going to give me. I'm keeping with my faith, and like I'm not going to give in to any of this. So the further and further we have all these negotiations just kind of breaking down, and the further that even the Crooked Man is to look at Red and realize that he has witch blood in him, because yeah, like he was birthed from a witch mother. All the more reason for this story to kind of easily kind of connect, all entwined within one another. So Hellboy goes on, and finally it's like, well, hey, like, come on, Snake, let's rattle. And he starts firing away at the Crooked Man, which then leads the Crooked Man to fire back with all of these kind of railings and stabbing uh, one of these fencing railings, stabbing into Hellboy consistently, which kind of forces him back into the church, which has Hellboy need to have Joe rip all these little fencing rods out of his body, so that way they can kind of continue on fighting, because they realize that something is going to go on here. So we come to a point here where the Crooked Man is to start to realize that uh, yeah, like this ground is consecrated, but within this graveyard that is around this church, there's a lot of sinners within there, and the Crooked Man can kind of sway and use that all against the church to get all of these sinners that are technically in the grounds to rise up and go up against Crooked Man, which is kind of this whole loophole. So the Crooked Man ends up calling forth these gamblers, these murderers, these that, and eventually even calling Wyatt the drunk to face off and try to kill, uh, which of course is to be uh, Tom here. So one by one, all these names are to be called. These bodies are to be coming out of these graveyards. Hellboy is taking his Submariner, his Mariner, his gun and whatever that gun is called, and uh, he starts firing away at all these kind of zombie like characters, and it's really fun. And when one of the like zombies goes on and is talking to the Reverend, and talks about how like the Reverend always looked at her and always maybe wanted a kiss or something like that. He was tempted by her, and now this girl is kind of giving herself to the Reverend, and Hellboy takes the girl and like choke slams her and crushes her. I thought that was a really cool scene. So the further and further all of these guys and gals keep popping in here, and Hellboy is going on and trying to fight back, and fighting against these. I thought it got really interesting here. So finally, the real figuring out of things is the Reverend realizes that uh since Tom has that lucky bone, and that the shovel was to go on and be the one that would bury a lot of uh, the people that were within the grounds. They go on to really realize that the lucky bone has some kind of god like thing that can go on and help them, and make this shovel to be a powerful weapon, and they put a cross upon the shovel, and so the Reverend uses this as a cross as kind of like this backing mechanism from all these zombies to kind of back them away. And Red takes the shovel and he starts swinging it against all these zombies and taking them all out, and then going on further and going outside and finding the Crooked Man and swiping him with the shovel, and now making the Crooked Man into this crow. And Red and Tom are realizing, like, okay, like now the Crooked Man is weak, and like we gotta strike while the iron's hot here and follow up and try to get to him and try to take him out here. So Joe, I think at this point is wanting to get more further into the action here, and Red is telling Joe, like, no, like, you go on and you stay at this church, and if anything happens to me and Tom, uh you go back to the bureau, like you get out of here, like you keep going down the mountain and don't stop until you find a telephone, and don't ever come back here. So here's where they go on, and there's several times where they had these kind of like chapter markings of these lucky bones and the hurricanes, and like all these little chapter things that I didn't really much talk about, but I kind of forgot to really mention it because I don't think it really matters. So they go on and they talk about the hurricane, and like it seems like every time they talked about the hurricane, I felt like they were calling the town the hurricane. I don't know why. um Let me pause here for a second. Okay, so eventually, again, like this is another opportunity where they're going on and they're talking more and more about this town. So eventually, this is where Red is talking about how like this town feels like a dimensional rift here, and there's something very Lovecraftian about this kind of town. And like the more and more it feels like, again, like they're just kind of using whatever supernatural words that they can kind of use left um within this dialogue, which I still found to be really fascinating and really interesting here, to eventually kind of get us to like the finale of this whole story. So Joe is talking about how she eventually realizes that she needs to go into the tunnel, and that the Reverend is thinking that he's going to need that shovel to go along with Joe, because he's going no matter what uh, Joe is going to tell him here, because Joe is talking to the Reverend and realizing, like, well, hey, like both you and me are both going to go into the tunnel blind anyways, because you've never been in that tunnel, and like I'm blind, so we might as well both go in there anyways. And like if anything, like this is a numbers game. And also like the way Joe and the Reverend was talking, like it seemed at first that they were just going to blow up, uh, the mines or the sewers or the tunnels underground. But Joe is like, no, I'm gonna just use a spell against it, and eventually that'll lead Joe, and that'll lead the Reverend to go on and find the spider that is down there, and also like the Reverend will go on and get killed via all of the crows that are down there that are connected to the Crooked Man, and eventually Joe will use her spell to dismantle the tunnels that are down there, and eventually she'll go on and find the spider, and this spider will become small, and Joe will bottle up the spider and defeat the spider, as well as also it seemed uh, beat uh, the Crooked Man to weaken him even much more so in some capacity, so he won't slip away again. So Tom and Hellboy make their way uh, into another uh, home, which eventually leads to uh, have Hellboy tell Tom to just kind of wait here, which in a horror movie you never go on and tell somebody to wait anywhere. Like you always just go both together, because we come to find that a mistake that Hellboy makes is like telling somebody to kind of wait there, and then when Hellboy thinks that the guy behind him is just Tom, all of a sudden Tom's head just and he realizes that it's the Crooked Man. He's like, "Oh crap!" So Hellboy eventually makes his way through this place, and that leads him to all of a sudden be almost like ghosts lifted up or poltergeistingly lifted up by the Crooked Man with his powers and kind of getting flung all over this house, which then leads him to uh, go flying through this wall. Tom finds him and it's like, hey man, like, and then uh, like they reverse the shot, and then like Hellboy just continues to get flung and thrown around through this entire building, and then eventually we get to the staircase, and then we have this real facing off between both the Crooked Man and both Hellboy here. So, and again, there's a lot of like good dialogue between the two of them, as also Hellboy is getting like a face full of bugs in his face and just covered in bugs within the scene. So uh we have Tom that arrives with the witch ball and is to go on and and have the witch ball go into the Crooked Man's mouth for him to choke on it, and to have Tom say that this is kind of revenge for Cora. And so like we're weirdly enough kind of using witchcraft against witchcraft here. It's kind of really cool and interesting. So the Crooked Man is now choking on this witch ball, and that goes on and has like Hellboy kind of get like the distraction he needs to go on and now take the Crooked Man and be able to kind of take him and toss him down these stairs. And while the Crooked Man is falling down these stairs, he's starting to lose his change. He's starting to lose his coins, which forces him all the way down these flights of stairs with all these broken bones. And And here's again where we have this Crooked Man with this kind of last little huzzah, where he's just like, well, hey, uh, like he's looking at Hellboy and he's like, look at this devil that thinks he's just a man, and and both of your roads will end you in darkness, just like mine, and both of you will burn, and like both of you must know this, that like both of your paths will end up just like mine either way. And also just reminding Hellboy again, it's like, well, yeah, your mother's also just gonna burn, and all this stuff this guy is saying. It's like, well, hey, like that's all good and great that you're telling us that that our lives are determined, that we're gonna all just end up in the same place that you are regardless. So you feel like you're going to win anyways, even though you're going to lose here, because Hellboy goes on and shoots the Crooked Man in the head and kills him. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're done. You're taken care of. You're donezo now. And like, yeah, you're probably gonna feel like you're going to win regardless, and you're trying to get every little bit of points you can on the board, even though you're going to lose. But if anything, like Tom and Red can feel good right now that they've taken down um, a threat to this town, and if anything, they'll worry about where they end up when they have to cross that bridge, anyways. So, uh, and if anything, they're gonna find out where they end up someday. So, really, also after Hellboy and Tom, after they leave against the Crooked Man, like Red is kind of concluding all along that it's like, well, hey, like really, like yeah, you had like that lucky bone on you the whole time, but really, like that lucky bone wasn't the thing that gave you power. If anything, like the power was inside of you all along. It's kind of one of those good moral things by the end of this, to just be like, well, yeah, like you became like a stronger man, and you inside had the power to eventually be able to defeat the Crooked Man, and and this and that. So, and that also, that the reason why Crooked Man wanted to take out Tom so badly and kind of corrupt people and figure out ways to defeat Tom is because the Crooked Man feared Tom the most. And because there's a whole thing here about uh, about what do people really and truly fear. And the Reverend eventually talks to Joe and say like, well, yeah, Red doesn't really fear anything. And the Reverend is like, no, like what Red fears is just how you feel about him, or how he has problems going on, and telling Joe how he feels about her. So both Red and Tom make their way back to Effie, and Effie is now a much older gal. And Tom goes on and he has some bindings, and he's going to go on and tie Effie up and maybe bring her to the cops or something. And so Red makes his way back to Joe, coming to find out that she went through the tunnel, and he's like, "Well, hey, I thought you were the smart one, this and that." And Joe is like, "Well, hey, we had to come back for our cargo. We had to, and now that we have this, now we can kind of get the heck out of here, and get our helicopter, and just and get the heck out of this town and never come back, I hope." So, and they also, well, Red and Joe kind of walk off in the sunset. the two of them are going on and saying like, well, yeah, like if anything, like Tom was never really a bad guy. Like he just needed the motivation and the push to be able to realize that, and he needed to come back to conquer his fears to realize that he was good all along, and that he'll always do the right thing, and he's like the pure good guy, that he'll always do good, and this and that. So uh but if anything, also like red is to also mention how like if you stare at the monster long enough, you don't look too bad, and Joe is like, well, hey, like I know the thing that you are afraid of, even in, if it is to eventually be a thing where he mentions, okay, I didn't bring up the thing where he mentions that he hates himself, because eventually uh, there was a part where he got a booby trap in the house. So Hellboy goes on and he's trying to go on and follow the crow, because he figures if he follows the crow, that gets him to the crooked man. And eventually, the further and further that Hellboy follows the crow, he unsheaths uh, kind of bullish like thing. It all has all these maggots on it, and then when he also follows the crow, he goes into a spot where he faces off against his crooked man, and that leads him right back to his mother, and his mother telling Hellboy that he should kill her, and Hellboy's like, well, no, that's not something I'm going to do. And she's like, no, like I need you to kill me because it's going to stop the pain. And so in the further and further that it seems that Hellboy is going to shoot his mother, and instead, like it looks like Red is almost going to shoot himself. So, and that's where he starts talking about like that he's the monster that she made, and that he hates himself, and this. So yeah, so and then eventually that makes him kind of get out of there and realize that he was kind of set into a trap, and he's kind of made quite a bit of mistakes on this mission, and eventually him again is to kind of learn from his mistakes, and that's where when he finally does face off against the crooked man and goes one on one with him, and it really takes him down here. Uh, so he's just kind of a young hero that's kind of very inexperienced, and he's going to make some mistakes, and he's going to realize that he's made mistakes, and he's going to learn from them, and then he's going to adapt and strategize, and he's going to become a better hero because of it. And then also he's probably going to need to rely on people, and that's where I think Hellboy has gone on to just like, okay, well, I need the Abe Sapien guy, like I'll need this agent guy, like I'll need all these kind of G-men around me, um, because I'll just realize that maybe I'm not the smartest guy in the room, or eventually realize that I'll need to rely on these people for help because they'll just be smarter, or they'll be this, or they'll be that, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so eventually, yeah. So once Joe and Hellboy kind of walk off in the telephone sunset, they call a telephone and ends up to having them have a chopper, and they fly off, and all of a sudden there's this horse that says, "Beware, I'm a witch," and then the movie just kind of ends. So with that said, I'm gonna get that out of here because I'm sure this movie I think was probably an hour and a half, and now I'm almost talking for 2 hours as I always do. Regardless, let me know in the comments below how you felt about Hellboy the Crooked Man, as I probably should have said that way earlier. But as usual, I always tend to forget these things, and I'm sure I've probably talked way longer than the movie is, but I don't care. I always say I don't care, but then it's like a very oxymoron like statement, because if I didn't care, then why would I go on and do a video? Um, I just like to talk. I just do. I just like to open this mouth and just say words as I'm doing now. Uh, Finally, after saying a numerous amount of times that I was going to do this review, I actually finished it and put it out. Uh, I'm sure there are probably other projects that I probably stated that I was going to do and didn't. I'm sure there are probably a number of uh, stuff that people have commented on things that I should go on and do other stuff and I didn't. And also, uh, really, it might come down to timing of things. Because rationally, after this, I'm thinking there's probably going to be 2 days where I probably may not post, because I'm going to actually be working out. And then after those 2 days, I may go on and consider what I'm going to do for working out, as well as also trying to post videos more consistently, because I want to focus on working out. Then again, also, I want to consistently be doing videos, and I don't have time for both. Because, newsflash, everybody, like watching a movie and then reviewing it, both those things take multiple hours, and I can't cut anything else from my life because I don't really have a life. So, with that said, I'm going to try to do the best I can doing all this stuff. I'm going to try to do the best I can to do everything else besides reviewing, and hopefully everyone can just accept whatever I put out for whatever day. Uh, Also, me talking about possibly doing some projects in the future. Other than this, I have nothing really planned in the future, but I do have movies that I think really are looking visually interesting and cool that I might just kind of toss out here. And I'm sure there'll be big, huge, massive mistakes because no one will ever have heard of these movies. But uh, they might just be something visually interesting and cool, or they might just be something I don't even review because I didn't even like the film. Uh, so I don't want to say names or I don't want to say projects and whatever. Also, I have recorded already numerous hours of a gameplay of a video game that I'm sure no one will care about, and hopefully I will at some point do reactions of those. But also, I am going to want to wait a bit of time to do that because I have gone on and technically, with an exchange of Timu credits of sorts, which costed me nothing. Uh, Technically bought a costume that ties to that video game, so I'm kind of waiting for technically that costume to arrive, and hopefully it arrives at my house because I am very iffy on whether or not, considering the closer it's coming to December's and stuff like that, that like things will properly ship and get to my house and everything will work out well, uh, because I've had stuff get lost in the mail. I've had all kinds of things. So I want to hope for the best, but I also want to tell people to not get their hopes up. And I don't want to state things and guarantee things. And also, I hate being very cryptic, but like, really, I don't want to guarantee anything right now because I also want to tell people that, like, I would love to review more. I would love to do more, and I would love to have the time to do so. So, if anything, besides anything that I've probably stated in past, upon community polls and whatever, uh, let me know what you would like reviewed on the channel. I know a lot of people have given me genre recommendations for horror things. Also, before you go on and you comment anything about a future request of whatever, also, can search it onto the thing to see if I haven't already reviewed it, because more than likely I already have. Also, maybe I could go on and do a number of stuff that I've already reviewed already and just come up with a different way to review it. Who knows? Commentaries. I don't want to do reactions because logically a reaction would just be commentaries. Because I don't want a content ID for anything. I know a lot of people could just be like, well, hey, man, you have a whole image of this. Like, isn't that basically just content ID and whatever? Weirdly, no. Like, none of these images have gotten flagged yet. I'm surprised. Uh, but I kind of figured at some point one of them would, because one of them did. Weirdly enough, yeah, there was a Teen Titans animated movie that I talked about, and I had the poster image, and for whatever weird reason, that video completely gotten taken down. I don't know why, uh, but it must have had something to do with that image. So that's why I kind of got very. Uh, that's why I got very the way I did with every single one of these visuals going forward. That's why a lot of times when I restarted this channel, it was just a black screen, and maybe it had a movie title, maybe it didn't, or I'd have to really uh, the visuals when I started this channel didn't really look all that great. It probably doesn't look any better now, but hopefully one day I will be able to really have something good going as far as visual stuff on here that a lot of people actually give a about. But regardless of that, that requires the monies. That requires the doughs. And you knows this is a small channel, and eventually you'll still probably be always a small channel to some people. And other than that, I'm just happy that we were able to continue doing this, because I was almost having so many life crises and whatever of not doing this whatsoever. So hey, there's that. I'm gonna get that out of here because I've already been speaking for 2 hours, and what a mistake this video was. I'm sure another a video that'll surprisingly do well, even though it probably shouldn't, or one that no one will see because it's 2 hours long. So that said, thank you for going on and watching this whole thing, because I'm sure you probably only watched the first uh, maybe 5 seconds of it, and you're just like, ah, this is too long, and you clicked off. So if you watched this whole video, uh, say in the comments below thank you, uh, because really I would just say that back to you for spending this whole time, spending 2 hours listening to a person that is just rattling off now. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.